He followed the stray cat one morning. But what happened after was a miracle. Could a stray cat truly lead a grieving widower to an abandoned baby and mend his broken spirit? You'll be astounded by the shocking discovery Arthur makes, revealing an almost unbelievable connection between the infant, the cat, and a cherished secret from his late wife's past. Subscribe, like, and listen to the full, incredible story to uncover the truth. The first sensation was the damp, biting cold of the old barn, a chill that seeped through Arthur's worn flannel shirt, despite the weak November sun struggling to pierce the grimy window panes. Then the smell, a cloying mix of decaying wood, ancient hay, and something else, something acrid and unsettling. Above it all, a sound, a thin, reedy cry, almost too faint to be real, yet sharp enough to snag at the edges of his hearing. It wasn't the insistent meow of the stray cat that had lured him in here. This was different, more desperate. His heart, a tired old drum, began to beat a little faster. The gray and white cat, now perched on a teetering stack of rotted pallets, stared intently into the darkest corner of the barn, its body language a taut line of urgent focus. It let out another sharp yowl, a clear summons. Arthur, his 62-year-old knees protesting, moved cautiously, the floorboards groaning under his boots. He pushed aside a stiff, dust-laden tarpaulin. The cry came again, weaker this time, followed by a soft, gurgling sound that sent a shiver down his spine. There, nestled amongst a pile of discarded newspapers in a flimsy cardboard box, was a bundle, a dirty, thin blanket barely covering what lay within. With trembling fingers, he pulled back a corner of the fabric. His breath hitched. A baby, impossibly small, its face a pale bluish tinge, lips a terrifying shade of purple. The tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic gasps. Its eyes were closed, the skin around them almost translucent. Cold, the infant was so cold. A raw protective instinct surged through Arthur, a feeling so fierce and unfamiliar it momentarily paralyzed him. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy with shock and adrenaline. Who would do this? How long had it been here? The question swirled unanswerable, eclipsed by the immediate, overwhelming need to act. The baby let out another whimper, a sound that felt like a physical blow. Its life was flickering like a candle in a harsh wind, and he, Arthur, was the only one there to shield it. He had to do something. Now, Arthur Pendleton had become a man intimately acquainted with silence. For 2 years, since his wife Carol succumbed to the relentless march of cancer, his small wooden house on the outskirts of Cooperstown, New York, had been a repository of echoes and memories. The cheerful chintz curtains Carol had sewn still framed the windows, but the light they let in seemed muted. The colors faded, much like Arthur himself. At 62, he felt older than his years, his once robust frame now stooped, his days measured out in solitary cups of coffee and the rustle of newspapers he barely read. Cooperstown, with its historic charm and the gentle rhythm of a small town, usually offered a quiet solace. But for Arthur, its familiarity had become a constant reminder of what was lost. The changing seasons along the shores of Otsego Lake, the vibrant autumn foliage that drew tourists, the crisp scent of wood smoke in the air, all were tinged with Carol's absence. They had loved this town, built a life here filled with simple joys, long walks, tending their small garden evenings spent reading by the fire. Now the garden was overgrown, the fireplace cold. He'd been a history teacher at the local high school, a job he'd loved for its connection to young minds and the grand sweep of the past. But after Carol died, the enthusiasm had withered. He retired early, the daily routine of work too stark a contrast to the emptiness at home. His colleagues and former students would greet him kindly when he ventured into town for groceries, their sympathy a well-meaning but heavy cloak. He knew they worried, saw the shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped. He appreciated their concern, but lacked the energy or perhaps the will to truly engage. The old barn in the backyard was another monument to a life interrupted. They'd had plans for it. Carol had dreamed of a pottery studio, Arthur a workshop for the model ships he used to build. Now it stood as a decaying shell filled with forgotten tools, broken furniture, and the ghosts of unfinished projects. He rarely went near it. The stray cat had appeared a few weeks ago, a skinny gray and white creature with sharp, intelligent green eyes. Arthur had first seen it darting across the dew-laden grass of his backyard at dawn, a fleeting shadow. He hadn't paid it much mind. He wasn't a cat person. Not really. Carol had been the animal lover in the family. He vaguely recalled her mentioning putting out scraps for some feral cat or other that frequented the edges of their property. A quiet act of kindness he hadn't given much thought to at the time. Sometimes, looking at this new stray, he felt a faint echo of Carol's gentle spirit, a pang of something he couldn't quite name. His days were a predictable loop. Wake before dawn, a pot of strong, bitter coffee, the silence of the house pressing in. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch watching the world wake up, the steam from his mug dissipating into the cool air. Other times he'd just stare out the kitchen window, lost in a fog of grief and resignation. Depression, his doctor had called it, prescribing pills that Arthur often forgot to take. What was the point? The vibrant tapestry of his life had unraveled, leaving only frayed threads. He was adrift, a ship without a rudder, waiting for a tide that never seemed to turn. The world, with its demands and its joys, felt distant, irrelevant. Until that one cold November morning, when the insistent cries of a stray cat pierced through his apathy and dragged him unwillingly at first towards a discovery that would irrevocably alter the desolate landscape of his existence. The morning had begun like any other in the 2 years since Carol's passing. Gray, cold, and steeped in a quiet melancholy, Arthur sat hunched on his porch swing, the springs groaning a familiar lament with each gentle rock. His coffee cup, clutched in hands that were starting to show the papery thinness of age, sent a plume of steam into the crisp November air. He watched it curl and vanish, a small fleeting thing much like the wisps of his own motivation. Then the cat appeared. The skinny gray and white stray he'd occasionally seen slinking around the property was more agitated than usual. Instead of its typical cautious skirting of the yard's perimeter, it paced back and forth near the porch steps, its sharp green eyes fixed on Arthur. It let out a series of insistent, high-pitched meows, a sound that was less a plea for food and more an urgent demand for attention. After a moment, it darted towards the old dilapidated barn at the edge of the backyard, then stopped, looked back at Arthur, and meowed again, louder this time. Arthur sighed. He wasn't in the mood for animal antics, but the cat's behavior was unusually persistent, almost frantic. It ran a few more feet towards the barn, then repeated its summons. A flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, or just a break from the crushing monotony, stirred within him. He set his coffee cup down on the worn wooden railing. His old work boots clicked softly on the dewy grass as he rose and with a resigned shrug began to follow the creature. As he neared the barn, the cat slipped through a gap in the warped wooden doors. Arthur paused. He hadn't been inside this barn in months, maybe longer. It was a place heavy with memories of Carol, of shared dreams, now gathering dust. As he pushed the creaking door further open and stepped into the musty gloom, a sudden vivid image flashed in his mind. Carol years ago, a mischievous smile on her face, placing a small bowl of milk just inside this very barn door. She'd confessed then, laughing, that she'd been secretly feeding a stray, a lean gray and white thing that reminded her of a cat she'd had as a child. This cat, the one that had just led him here, bore an uncanny resemblance. It was as if Carol's long-ago kindness had in some unfathomable way returned with a purpose. The cat's sharp yowl from the far corner snapped him back to the present. He moved towards the sound, his unease growing with each step, and then he saw it. The scene that would forever be seared into his memory. The scene from the hook, the cardboard box, the cat's desperate cries, the almost invisible rise and fall of a tiny chest. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. A baby, here in his barn, abandoned. He acted on pure adrenaline, his mind a maelstrom of horror and disbelief. His call to 911 was a choked, breathless report. While he waited a lifetime compressed into minutes, he gently lifted the impossibly light infant from the box. Stripping off his worn woolen coat, he wrapped the baby snugly, cradling the fragile form against his own chest, trying to impart some warmth, some life. He could feel the baby's shallow bird-like breaths against his skin, each one a tiny miracle, each one a terrifying question mark. The wail of sirens grew closer. Paramedics rushed in their calm professionalism, a stark contrast to Arthur's frantic energy. As they worked swiftly, one of them, a young woman with kind eyes, carefully unfolded the thin blanket the baby had been wrapped in. A small, crumpled piece of paper fell out. She picked it up, her expression somber, as she read the hastily scribbled words aloud. "Please take care of my child." Arthur felt a strange, wrenching pang in his chest. He and Carol had always wanted children, a dream that life and then her illness had cruelly denied them. Now this, a desperate mother, a discarded child, and him, a lonely old man standing at an unforeseen crossroads. As the paramedics carried the baby out to the waiting ambulance, the cat, which had been a silent, watchful presence throughout the ordeal, rubbed briefly against his leg before melting back into the shadows of the barn. Arthur stood there numb and trembling, the imprint of a fragile life still warm against his heart. His initial goal, born of sheer shock, was simple. He needed to know if that baby would survive. Little did he know that desperate hope was already beginning to reshape his world. The days that followed the discovery in the barn were a blur for Arthur. The baby, a girl the nurses at Albany Medical Center had provisionally named Emma, was in critical condition: hypothermia, malnutrition, dehydration. The litany of her ailments was a harsh reminder of how close she had come to death. The local Cooperstown police had opened an investigation, but leads were scarce. The note was their only clue, a poignant testament to a mother's desperation, but offering no hint of her identity. Arthur found himself making the hour-long drive to Albany almost daily. He'd sit for hours in the neonatal intensive care unit, a silent, awkward presence beside Emma's incubator. He wasn't family, not legally, but the nurses, Seeing the raw concern etched on his face had bent the rules slightly, allowing him short, quiet visits. He'd watch her tiny, paper-thin eyelids, the flutter of her miniature fingers, the rhythmic beep of the monitors that were her lifeline. He started bringing small, soft toys, a plush lamb, a brightly colored rattle, placing them just outside her incubator, small tokens of a hope he barely dared to voice. Back at home, the gray and white cat became a more permanent fixture. Arthur, in a moment of uncharacteristic sentimentality, named her Hope. He set out food and water, made a makeshift bed for her in a warm corner of the kitchen from an old sweater of Carol's Hope. In turn, offered a quiet, undemanding companionship. She'd often curl up at his feet while he drank his morning coffee, her gentle purr, a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. She was a living link to that terrible, transformative morning, a furry, green-eyed reminder of the fragile life he'd helped save. The first significant complication arose in the form of Child Protective Services. Miss Evans, a social worker assigned to Emma's case, was a woman in her late 40s, professional and efficient, with a no-nonsense demeanor that Arthur found initially intimidating. She interviewed him extensively about the circumstances of the discovery, her questions polite but probing. Arthur understood the necessity of it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being scrutinized, his sudden, intense interest in Emma viewed with a degree of suspicion. He was, after all, an elderly single man with no experience in childcare. During one of his hospital visits, a friendly older nurse, a woman named Pat, was tending to Emma. As she adjusted a tiny sensor on Emma's shoulder, she remarked, "She's got a little star-shaped birthmark right here. See, sweetest thing." You know, it's funny. We had a young woman in the ER a few months back just for a quick checkup. She seemed very distressed, very alone. She had a birthmark just like that same spot. Just a kid herself. Always wondered what happened to her. She never came back for her follow-up. Pat's words were casual, a fleeting observation, but they lodged in Arthur's mind. A star-shaped birthmark. A troubled young woman. Could there be a connection? It was a nebulous thought too vague to pursue, but it added another layer of poignant mystery to Emma's story, a whisper of her unknown past. As Emma slowly gained strength, the discussions with Miss Evans shifted towards Emma's future temporary foster care was the immediate plan. The thought of Emma going to strangers of his visits becoming restricted or even ceasing filled Arthur with an unexpected ache. He found himself scouring the internet late at night, reading about foster care, about guardianship, about adoption. The articles were daunting, the legalities complex, the requirements stringent. Yet the more he read, the more a quiet resolve began to build within him. He couldn't just walk away. He'd held that child, felt her fight for life against his own chest. That connection forged in crisis felt too profound to sever. The stakes were becoming clearer. Emma needed a home, a permanent, loving one. The authorities were looking for suitable candidates. Arthur was, by all conventional measures, an unlikely one. His age, his grief, his solitude, they all stacked up against him. But within him, something had shifted. The fog of depression hadn't entirely lifted, but there were now clearings, moments when the anemic light of purpose could shine through. He was beginning to realize that his initial goal, to see Emma survive, was no longer enough. A new, far more audacious goal was starting to take shape in his heart. A goal that seemed both terrifying and undeniably right. Spring was tentatively breathing life back into the Cooperstown landscape. Patches of stubborn snow still clung to the shadows, but the robins had returned, and the first crocuses were pushing their way through the thawing earth. Emma, too, was a testament to resilience. She had graduated from the NICU and was now a healthy, gurgling baby, her brown eyes bright with curiosity, her grip surprisingly strong when she wrapped her tiny fingers around Arthur's. She was currently in the care of an experienced short-term foster mother, Mrs. Gable, who lived a town over. Arthur was grateful for Mrs. Gable's kindness and expertise, but every visit, every handover, was a fresh pang of longing. The day Miss Evans from CPS called him in for a formal meeting, Arthur knew it was a pivotal moment. He drove to the county office building with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Hope the cat had watched him leave from the porch, her green eyes seeming to hold a silent encouragement. Miss Evans' office was neat, organized, and a little impersonal. She got straight to the point. "Arthur," she began, her tone serious but not unkind. "Emma is thriving, and we need to make long-term plans for her. We have several excellent pre-approved foster-to-adopt families who have expressed interest." Arthur's heart sank. This was what he had feared. He took a deep breath, the words he'd rehearsed 100 times suddenly feeling inadequate. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice steadier than he expected, "I understand that, but I would like to be considered. I want to provide Emma with her permanent home. I want to adopt her." Miss Evans looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned back in her chair. "Arthur, I've seen your dedication to Emma. It's clear you've formed a strong bond. But you must understand the realities. You're 62. You're a single man. You have no prior experience raising a child. The vetting process for adoption is incredibly rigorous. We have to consider what's in Emma's best interest for the next 18-plus years." Each point was a valid concern, a hurdle he knew he faced. But the thought of life without Emma, of returning to the hollow silence of his empty house, was unbearable. "I may know my age is a factor," he said, meeting her gaze directly, "but I'm in good health. I'm financially stable. I can offer her love, security, a devoted father, Carol, my late wife, and we always wanted children. It never happened for us. When I found Emma, it was like—" He trailed off, struggling to articulate the profound shift she had brought into his life. "It was like she woke up a part of me I thought was long dead. I can do this. Miss Evans, I need to do this." He spoke of Carol, of their quiet life, of the aching void she'd left. He talked about the barn, the cat, the almost mystical feeling that morning that something profound was happening. He didn't try to embellish or persuade with anything other than the raw honesty of his feelings and his newfound determination. Miss Evans listened patiently, taking notes. When he finished, there was another long silence. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right, Arthur," she said. "If you're serious, you can submit a formal application. It will be a long and challenging road. There will be background checks, psychological evaluations, home studies, parenting classes. There are no guarantees." A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. It wasn't a "yes, not yet," but it was a chance. "I understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes." Leaving Miss Evans' office, clutching a thick packet of application forms, Arthur felt a mixture of elation and trepidation. This was it. He had crossed a threshold. There was no going back to his old grieving self. He was no longer just reacting to events. He was actively choosing a new path, a daunting, uncertain but exhilarating one. Emma was his pole star now. As he drove home, the spring sunshine felt warmer. The future, for the first time in 2 long years, held not just the shadow of loss, but the bright, beckoning light of possibility. This was his point of no return. The decision to pursue Emma's adoption set in motion a whirlwind of activity that consumed Arthur's days and much of his nights. The application packet Miss Evans had given him was a formidable beast, demanding exhaustive details about every aspect of his life, from his financial statements and medical history to his philosophies on discipline and education. He tackled it with a meticulousness he hadn't felt since his teaching days, often with Hope purring softly on the desk beside him, a furry paperweight, and a surprisingly comforting presence. The initial home study was nerve-wracking. Miss Evans, accompanied by another social worker, inspected every nook and cranny of his old wooden house Arthur had cleaned for days, scrubbing floors, washing windows, trying to see his familiar surroundings through their critical eyes. He pointed out the small vegetable patch he'd started to clear in the backyard, Carol's old garden, explaining his plans to grow fresh food for Emma. He showed them the spare room upstairs, its walls still a faded floral wallpaper from decades past, and described his vision for it as a bright, cheerful nursery parenting classes were next. As the oldest participant by a good 20 years and one of the few single men, Arthur initially felt conspicuous and out of place amongst the eager young couples. They practiced diapering on dolls, discussed sleep schedules, and learned CPR. He fumbled with the plastic doll, much to the amusement of a young, expectant mother next to him. But he listened intently, took copious notes, and surprised himself with his eagerness to learn. He found a small informal support group online for older adoptive and foster parents, and their shared experiences and encouragement became an unexpected lifeline, reminding him that love and commitment knew no age. He began transforming the spare room, stripping the old wallpaper, painting the walls a soft, sunny yellow. He haunted secondhand stores and yard sales, carefully selecting a sturdy crib, a changing table, and a rocking chair, sanding down and repainting pieces that had seen better days but still had good bones. His old carpentry skills, rusty from disuse, slowly returned. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper, the scent of fresh paint, the tangible progress. It was all a form of therapy, a way of actively building a future. Miss Evans continued her visits, her demeanor still professional, but with a discernible thaw. She saw the freshly painted nursery, the carefully assembled crib, the stacks of parenting books on his nightstand. She observed his interactions with Hope, the gentle way he spoke to the cat, the easy affection between them. She noted his improved mood, the spark of energy in his eyes that hadn't been there months ago. There were setbacks. Emma developed a nasty ear infection that required a late-night dash to the emergency room. With Mrs. Gable, Emma's temporary foster mother, Arthur, who had rushed to meet them there, felt a sickening wave of helplessness watching Emma cry in pain. The incident, while frightening, only solidified his resolve. He spent the night in the uncomfortable hospital waiting room, and when Emma was finally settled, he sat by her small bed, humming old lullabies Carol used to love until she drifted off to sleep. Miss Evans informed of the incident, noted his unwavering presence and concern. The bureaucratic process was slow, filled with frustrating delays and seemingly endless paperwork. There were days when Arthur felt overwhelmed, when the weight of responsibility and the fear of failure pressed down on him. In those moments, he'd walk out to the old barn, now less a place of gloom and more a symbol of miraculous beginnings. He'd sit on an overturned bucket, hope often winding around his ankles, and just breathe, remembering the fragility of that first encounter with Emma and the strength he'd found within himself. He was no longer just reacting to the forms and the interviews. He was proactively shaping his new life brick by painstaking brick, driven by a love that had taken root in the unlikeliest of circumstances. Summer arrived in Cooperstown, bringing with it long sun-drenched days and a heightened sense of anticipation for Arthur. Emma, now nearly 6 months old, was thriving. After extensive reviews and positive reports from the parenting classes and home studies, CPS had approved Arthur for pre-adoptive foster placement. Emma was finally living with him, her laughter and baby babble echoing through the once silent rooms of the old wooden house. Hope the cat had taken to her new tiny housemate with a curious gentleness, often stationing herself like a furry sentinel near Emma's crib or playpen. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, the constant vigilance required for a mobile infant. Arthur was learning on the job, often exhausted, but equally exhilarated. He established new routines, baby-proofed the house with an almost comical thoroughness, and discovered the simple joy of watching Emma splash in her baby bathtub or gum contentedly on a teething rusk. The final adoption hearing was scheduled for late August. This was the last major hurdle, the culmination of nearly 9 months of relentless effort and emotional investment. The stakes felt immense. Miss Evans had assured him that things looked positive, that the reports were all favorable, but a sliver of anxiety remained, a fear that some unforeseen obstacle could still derail everything. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Arthur found himself drawn back to the old barn. He'd decided to clear it out properly, not just as a practical measure, but as a symbolic act of closing one chapter and fully embracing another. He envisioned it perhaps years down the line as a rustic playhouse for Emma, or maybe even a space where he could set up a small workshop again, this time to build toys for his daughter. He spent several weekends sifting through dusty boxes, discarding broken tools and rotted wood. It was during one of these cleaning sessions in the very corner where he had found Emma, tucked away beneath a pile of old sacks, near where the cardboard box had lain, that his hand brushed against something cool and metallic. He pulled it out. It was an old, tarnished silver bracelet, a delicate chain with a single small charm engraved with the letter C. Carol's bracelet. He remembered it vividly. She had worn it often. He hadn't seen it since shortly before she passed, assuming it had been lost in the shuffle of hospital visits and her declining health. A wave of emotion washed over him, holding the cool metal in his palm. It felt like a tangible link to her, a quiet affirmation from the past. It was as if Carol, in her own way, was part of this journey, her love subtly interwoven with the events that had brought Emma into his life. He slipped the bracelet into his pocket, a precious talisman. This discovery, so unexpected, so poignant, didn't dispel his nervousness about the upcoming hearing, but it imbued him with a renewed sense of peace and fortitude. It felt like a blessing. The day before the court date, Arthur experienced his dark night of the soul. Emma had a slight fever, was unusually fussy, and refused to sleep. Exhausted and overwhelmed, a torrent of doubts assailed him. Was he truly up to this? Was he too old? Was he being selfish, denying Emma a younger, more conventional family? The weight of responsibility felt crushing. He paced the floor with a wailing Emma in his arms, his heart aching with a mixture of love and fear. Hope, sensing his distress, rubbed against his legs, her purr a low rumble of comfort. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emma quieted her small body, relaxing against his chest. Looking down at her peaceful, sleeping face, his resolve solidified once more. This was his daughter. He would move heaven and earth for her. He was ready. The family courtroom was smaller and less intimidating than Arthur had imagined, its wood-paneled walls and muted lighting lending an air of quiet solemnity. He sat at a polished table, Miss Evans beside him, her presence a reassuring anchor. Emma, dressed in a soft pink sleeper, gurgled contentedly in her carrier at his feet, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the proceedings. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, entered and took her seat. She reviewed the thick file before her, her expression thoughtful. Miss Evans was called upon to summarize the CPS report detailing Arthur's journey from the initial discovery to his successful completion of all pre-adoptive requirements, highlighting his unwavering commitment and the strong bond he had formed with Emma. Then it was Arthur's turn. The judge asked him why he wished to adopt Emma. He had rehearsed a speech, but in that moment, the carefully chosen words seemed inadequate. He looked at Emma, then back at the judge, his voice thick with emotion. "Your Honor," he began, "2 years ago, I lost my wife, Carol. I thought I'd lost everything, that my life was over. Then one morning, a little stray cat led me to this child." He gestured towards Emma. Finding her, helping her. It wasn't just about saving her life. It was about her saving mine. She's brought light back into a very dark place. She's given me a reason to live, to hope again. I love her more than words can say. All I want is the chance to be her father, to give her the safe, loving home she deserves. His voice cracked on the last few words. There was a profound silence in the courtroom, broken only by Emma's soft cooing. The judge looked at Arthur for a long moment, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Mr. Pendleton," she said finally, her voice warm, "it is clear to this court that you have already become Emma's father in every way that truly matters. Your love and dedication are evident. After careful review of all reports and testimonies, and with the best interests of the child Emma as our paramount concern, this court finds great pleasure in granting your petition for adoption." A choked sob escaped Arthur. Tears streamed down his face, tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming joy. Miss Evans squeezed his arm, her own eyes shining. "Congratulations, Arthur," she whispered. "She's yours." He reached down and gently lifted Emma from her carrier, holding her close, burying his face in her soft hair. "Hello, Emma Pendleton," he murmured, his heart overflowing. "Welcome home, little one, welcome home for good." Life in the small wooden house in Cooperstown transformed. The quiet, grief-stricken rooms were now filled with Emma's happy babble, the patter of her tiny feet as she began to toddle, and the constant, comforting purr of Hope, who had become Emma's devoted furry shadow. Arthur, once a man defined by loss, was now defined by love. He cherished every milestone: Emma's first tooth, her first steps, her first delighted "da-da." The pale yellow nursery, once a room of hopeful preparation, was now a vibrant hub of playtimes and bedtime stories. A few months after the adoption was finalized, the local newspaper, the Cooperstown Chronicle, featured their story. Arthur, initially hesitant, agreed to the interview, hoping it might inspire others. The headline read, "He followed the stray cat one morning and found a daughter and a miracle." In the article, Arthur simply said, "I followed a stray cat, and it gave me a reason to live." The story resonated deeply within the community and beyond, a heartwarming tale of hope, reborn from despair. Inspired by the outpouring of support and his own profound experience, Arthur, with the help of some friends and community leaders, established a small local foundation. He called it Hope's Haven, a tribute to the little cat who had started it all, and the new hope that now defined his life. The foundation's mission was simple: to support abandoned children in need of loving homes and to assist local animal shelters in caring for stray and unwanted pets. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after Emma's adoption, Arthur was working in the yard raking leaves with Emma playing nearby under Hope's watchful green eyes. His elderly next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, leaned over the fence. "Arthur," she said, a nostalgic smile on her face, "it does my heart good to see you so happy with that little darling. You know your Carol, bless her soul. She used to put food out near that old barn all the time. Said there was a skinny little gray and white stray she was trying to befriend." Arthur paused, his rake forgotten. He looked towards the barn, then at Hope, who was patiently allowing Emma to tug at her ear. Carol's kindness reaching across time had paved the way. It wasn't magic, he knew, but a beautiful, poignant convergence of compassion and circumstance. He kept Carol's silver bracelet on his bedside table, nestled beside a framed photograph of a smiling Emma, with Hope curled at her feet. It was a reminder of a love that endured and a new love that had healed his deepest wounds. Arthur Pendleton, once a man lost in the shadows, now lived a life illuminated by the laughter of his daughter and the unwavering loyalty of a stray cat named Hope, his heart forever touched by the everyday miracle that had found him one cold morning in an old forgotten barn.